Okay. Okay. Welcome. First new video on the channel, a bit of a refresh. Now, if you're coming from my Instagram, you understand the concept of this, but I'm going to explain it anyway. So I have a big ass whiteboard here, which is basically my theme of the week. And when I say theme of the week, it's, in a sense, long form journaling. It comes back to something I remembered about my GCSE drama. Not that I took it, it was compulsory. The way to learn your lines the best is to actually, or the way to memorize something the best is actually not to just repeat it over and over again, but it's to write it down. And once you write something down, you actually absorb the information way better. So I thought, if I really want to absorb a concept, why don't I write it out? And I could write it in, I could obviously write it in a pen with a pen and pad, but on a whiteboard is better because it's bigger and it's also way more visible to me in my room. So that over the week, I could actually develop the idea as it goes on, rub things out, change things, add things. And that was the plan. And it's a really, really good concept because I feel like there's so much to learn from this right now. I'm going to have this video one take, stream of consciousness, and just sort of see where my mind goes. So this could be 5 minutes or 50 minutes. I have no idea. Let me read it out to you first, then I'll pick it apart. Iron isn't forged in lukewarm conditions. Iron is forged in fire. How do you expect to be forged into the highest version of yourself with half the necessary measure of effort? Tension is what creates ascension. Lean into the fire, the tension. The cave you aren't willing to explore holds the treasure that you are seeking. How would you define your lukewarm and fire? Lukewarm is the conditions in which you feel comfortable and control. Fire is where you feel discomfort and a lack of control. You aren't supposed to feel in control in fire, yet you are because you chose to be in it. So, what actions and positions can you put yourself in that challenge your control and raise the standard of your discomfort? The whole point of realizing you are forged in fire is for two reasons. Number one, people aren't willing to get in the heat because they're too afraid to burn, not realizing they enter a molten state, hyperreactive to change. It's that state of discomfort/heat that literally shapes and changes you. 2. People aren't willing to put themselves in the heat, but not from fear this time, from anxiety, ambiguity, and laziness. The fire is pressure. It's the heat at your heels, and there's two ways you experience this pressure. You either shy away, avoid losing, keeping yourself comfortable, keep it cool, and extinguish the fire off your heels. Or 2, you understand something. The pressure is the greatest catalyst for growth. The other side of pressure lays a taste of the paragon of yourself, a taste of how potential can be filled with intentional pressure. Yet again, most people shy away from that pressure because they live life by a flawed principle: to not lose and not to win, which is voluntarily withdrawing yourself from so much of what life has to offer, to never experience the greatness, fulfillment, euphoria of life because you're too afraid to enter the race and lose. It's a sad way to live, an even sadder way to die. Most men die at 20 but get buried at 80. And that's it. I want to pick apart it bit by bit so you can extract really how valuable this can be for your life. Iron isn't forged in lukewarm conditions, iron is forged in fire. Obviously, this is talking about not just intensity, but in pressure as well, as I go on to explain. Now, I actually started this off by being about intensity, and I got a DM from a guy saying, I'll put the screenshot on screen, saying like, look, this is so valuable. And then he's saying like, this is the best account on Instagram, and then mentioned pressure. And I thought, he's taken this in a way it's about pressure when I took it in a way about intensity. So we'll carry on. One of the things that really came to mind was, how do you expect to be forged in the highest version of yourself with half the necessary measure of effort? People really expect the best results from things by just dabbling their toes in. You want to get soaked by this water. This water is a metaphor for abundance of life, really. And you're dipping your toes in to see if it's really wet. But the only way to actually truly get drenched in life's abundance is to just dive head first and see what happens. I think the problem is that, again, to use the water example, if you wanted to learn to swim, you couldn't dip your toes into water and expect that to do the job. It just doesn't work like that. You can't have half the results and expect you can't put in half the effort and expect all the results as a way to then be like, oh, okay, now I can put all the effort in and get double the results. No, it doesn't work like that. The cave you aren't willing to enter holds the treasure you're seeking. It's quite self-explanatory. What you are afraid of going into, that intensity you're afraid of, is really what's going to actually cause the change in your life. How would you define your lukewarm fire? Again, the lukewarm version of your life is where you feel comfortable and in control. Anywhere you feel discomfort and a lack of control is where you grow. But you need to understand this. This pressure or this lack of control you give yourself has to be calculated. It has to be purposeful. You can't just let your life go totally out of control and be in an uncomfortable situation that's not going to make you grow, although it could. You have to purposely put yourself in a situation to be in a lack of control almost. For example, when I booked my first marathon, that was the most impulsive promise I've ever made, and I really like to talk about impulsive promises all the time, that my two best mates were way more athletic than me, and I decided when they mentioned it, I was like, yeah, fuck it, like I'll do it. I couldn't run 400 meters. Genuinely, I tried to run and I ran 400 meters and I stopped because I couldn't run any further. And when we booked it, the pressure was applied, but I applied it myself because I paid the money, I bought the ticket, and I almost knew what I was getting into, but I didn't. It was an impulsive promise because I didn't know what I was getting into, but I made the promise on purpose anyway. So, what are actions and positions you can put yourself in that challenge your control and raise the standard of your discomfort? That is something, again, I've just spoken about in my personal experience. That is really independent to you. Now, I think the most important part of this whole topic of the week is this sentence here. People aren't willing to get in heat because they're too afraid to burn, not realizing they enter a molten state, hyperreactive to change. People think pressure is what breaks you, but pressure is what forms you. It's understanding that pressure doesn't break you, it molds you. It makes you into the person you need to be. If you were, how else can I explain this? You don't, like I said, you don't burn, you melt. And when that pressure finally cools off, your state changes and you develop into a person you've never been before. And it's really hard to get into people's brains that taking a step, taking that leap of faith into something that is wildly uncomfortable isn't going to break you, it's going to make you. And you really need to make that switch to understand that that lack of control and that discomfort you feel is actually what you need to feel. Okay. Or, for example, people aren't willing to put themselves in the heat, but not from fear this time, from anxiety, ambiguity, and laziness. A lot of people would put pressure on themselves, but they don't know what they want to put pressure on themselves for, which is almost a lack of purpose, direction in life. And that's something you really have to figure out yourself. I'm not going to go into this on this video because, wow, it's a topic in itself. And some people are also just lazy. They're not willing to do the work when they're in the pressure, so that the pressure they wouldn't benefit from it at all. Now, the fire is pressure. This is where I made the switch. The fire is pressure. It's the heat at your heels. If you imagine you set your heels on fire, there's two ways of going about it. You extinguish it and you move on with your life, or you run. You try run it off and use the wind and the air resistance to burn the heat off your heels. And you'll realize that by doing that, by focusing so solely on getting away from that pressure and extinguishing the fire that's on your heels, you've run so far down the road. And that's what I'm trying to say to you, that heat isn't a sign that you are burning, it's a sign to run in a certain direction. You can probably tell I fucking love an analogy, but... And the pressure is the greatest catalyst for change. And the sentence I wrote about this was, the other side of pressure lays the taste of the paragon of yourself, a taste of potential, a taste of how it can be filled with intentional pressure. How you can fill your potential with intentional pressure. Let me give you an example again. If you're in a bath and let's say you filling your potential was getting the bath to the very top. Now, the intentional pressure in that example will be adding things into the bath, which displaces the water even more, so the water level rises. The pressure you add to your life allows you to get close to that potential because it forces you in that direction. If you know that how else can I explain this? If you know that you wouldn't go very far running by yourself and you decide, fuck it, I'm going to run with someone else, you are purposefully putting that pressure on yourself to make sure you actually stay accountable to to go towards the direction you want to be in. And the flawed principle that most people live their life by is to not lose and not... Yeah, I did write that right. The flawed principle that most people live their life by is to not lose rather than to win, which is voluntarily withdrawing yourself from so much of what life has to offer. I get it, right? You could be afraid if you never put yourself in a position to be rejected by the girl, you'd never be rejected by the girl. If you never put yourself in a position to be embarrassed, you'd never be embarrassed. But you sacrifice the very thing that you actually want in the first place. You sacrifice getting the girl you want. You sacrifice living a life on your own terms. Most importantly, if you never put yourself in a position to lose, you never put yourself in a position to win. And I think that's what... It's sad to see people live that way. And like I said, it's sad to see people live that way, but it's even sadder to see people die that way. So many people don't understand the gravity of their mortality and realizing you live one life and you're afraid to... you don't experience life to even half of the fulfillment and half the greatness it could be because you're too afraid to lose some fucking stupid things. Your pride stops you from living a life you want to live. Your fear of embarrassment stops you from living a life you want to live is stupid. Which is why I say most men die at 20 but don't get buried until they're 80. That is... When I remember the first time I heard that, it potentially slapped him around the face quite physically. I think I actually felt a pain in my jaw. The flawed principle, I don't want to keep echoing myself here, but all of this is to say the pressure and intensity that you avoid in life is the exact thing that would cause you to live a life you want to live. And that's the reason you're here, right? This is self-development. This is pursuing the best version of yourself. This is pursuing Perpetual, right? This is the whole reason I called the community Perpetual, because it is about getting better constantly. To give you the definition of Perpetual, I could probably do it without even looking at my Mac. It's something occurring repeatedly, so frequent, it's seemingly uninterrupted. If your progress is uninterrupted, that's what your progress is, perpetual. You are pursuing the perpetual version of yourself. And you do that how? By adding pressure. By leaning into the fire, by leaning into that intensity. That's what makes life worth fucking living. The lack of control you feel is just... It's a metaphor. That the fire is obviously a metaphor for just the place you have to go to change. And I think that wraps it up. I don't want to go too on about this, but that was the week of the 23rd of March. I will hopefully see you next week with another topic. And yeah, if this helped you in any way, feel free to drop a sub or feel free to join Perpetual community. It's free for 7 days. No questions asked. If you don't like it, you can leave, but I can guarantee you can like it. No one has actually joined yet with the free trial and then not stayed. So yeah, challenge yourself, lean into the fire and pursue Perpetual.